Okay, so yeah, the title is right there in front of us. I'm going to be talking about emergent form in aleatoric music, and hopefully, the sort of, I guess, the promise I'm trying to make is that this is some kind of potentially interesting application of some of the research we've been doing in the orchestration and perception research in actor, and just applying it to something that's a little bit outside of our usual comfort zone. So the subject for this analysis is All Voices Are Heard by James Saunders. All the scores and live recordings here are provided by the composer. I'm not sure that the score is available on his website, so I'm not putting that in the slide directly, but it's a text score, and that graphic sort of behind where I said this is the score, that is all the text that's in there. And if to put it very, very simply, a group of composers come together, they compile a list of sounds that they decide on beforehand, and then each one of them individually chooses an order for those sort of little sound items that they have in their list, and then they just keep iterating or performing that list until everyone performs the same list, and that's when the piece ends. I know this is a bit abstract and confusing, so I'll jump right into a quick performance that is just under 2 minutes, and then I think that'll help ground everything that I'm talking about. If this is too loud, let me know. Don't hear anything?
Yeah, no sound. You need to.
No, yeah, we need to, after the breakout session, redo the, just a minute. Okay, that should do it. Sorry. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Okay. Does that work?
Great. Orange, strawberry, strawberry. Great. Apple, pear, mango, pear, apple, pear, mango, strawberry.
After this, they just move on to another iteration of the piece. So they move on to another list of items and just start a completely new. Basically, they don't even wait for the audience to have a chance to clap, but that's just a choice they made for that performance. So I'll stop it there. All right. So, what does this have to do with orchestration research, right? I mean, let's just talk about the very general. The attributes that sort of stick out. There's no fixed instrumentation. I mean, they chose to do it with words, right? Just text and voices. And there's no fixed sonic material. So it could be words, it could be pitch sounds, it could be basically anything. And so how can we talk about form, orchestration research, what is even going on? So to start and tackle those, I'm going to bring in some of the theories discussed by various members in actors. So the first thing is sound mass music. I feel like that's when it starts, I don't know, all I can hear is a mass of jumbled voices. And let me just read the definition of sound mass here. This is from Jason Noble's, well, I mean, partly from the dissertation. This is specifically picked directly from the Journal of New Music. Oh, sorry, I'm having too many windows one over the other, and I can't get them all to move away from the text. There it is. Sound mass, a perceptually homogeneous and dense auditory unit integrating multiple sound events or components while retaining an impression of multiplicity. Although their acoustical correlates may be highly complex, sound masses are perceptually simple because they resist perceptual segregation in one or more parameters. Basically, it sounds like a giant mass of sound. And so, okay, it's clear that the piece starts there, but that doesn't, it doesn't seem like that's the driving force throughout. It doesn't stay in that sort of one area of perception. And so moving on a little bit to some of the sort of the sort of general view of how timbre and auditory scene analysis helps us form structures in music. I'm not going to go over this. I know a lot of you know this, and those who don't, then I'm sure that this is going to be discussed more thoroughly in some of the later sessions this week. But specifically for this piece, we have, this is obviously, just to mention, this is from Timbre as a structuring force in music. This specific graphic is from the version that will be up on the website by McAdams, Goodchild, and Soden, hopefully soon. I'm sure they'll talk more about that later. Okay, so there's clear phrase segmentations, right? We have these big breaks between the iterations of the list once they all sort of negotiate their tempo. And we also have between the different phrases, sorry, there's this progressive orchestration, the sort of process music of all these tiny changes and tiny adjustments that happen between each phrase. But then that would suggest that there's really just this from point A to point B, or just some sort of larger, it's all just one process, right? It's process music, so it's all just one big A in terms of the form. But I think we can break that down a little further. And so just to help us ground all this a little bit, this is a very naive sort of computer-generated audio to test my ideas against. This is an early version of the algorithm, the output that we're seeing here, but I chose it for its brevity. So this was just 4 iterations of the list, and you can see the 6, you can read it like a score. It's 6 voices. Each one has 6 possible elements in their list, and then you see each one of them giving their list here on the left side. And then as they change, you can see the very last iteration, everyone sort of goes through the same order of the list. Decisions in terms of how they're done here is sort of some wonky weighted by loudness. So if they're farther away from someone, they consider their choice less. And there's also some random loudness variation between them to make sure that we can avoid stalemates, like in the sort of second phrase here that we see that there's the first and last parts of the list are sort of equally chosen, I guess, by the 2 sides of the ensemble. This one converges too quickly, but it's great for these slides, so that's why I stuck with this. For the continuing work on this simulation, it's this constant case of better is the enemy of good enough, so I'm still working on refining it. The current problem is that the rates of convergence are too quick because computers are just really good at knowing exactly what's happening and making perfect decisions. So I want to add some more noise into that without losing the determinacy of the process, so it won't just go on forever. So that's part of the problem there. But we're not going to hang too much on that because this particular version that you see on the screen is good enough to start talking about the general perceptual form that I'm suggesting. Generally, I see this as a big sort of ABC kind of form. So we start with the sound mass, then we have these streams that are formed. It's not a sound mass anymore, but rather you can start hearing groups that are sort of opposed to each other. And as those groups and individuals converge even further, then they become sort of this fused whole at the last rendition, at last iteration, sorry. The simulation doesn't convey some perceptual processes well. Even the recordings that we heard of the pieces, I think attention, the effects of attention is definitely lost. So the attention of the performers, they can choose to listen to the left side. If they hear that they have already agreed on something, they might want to continue agreeing with the person on the left. So all these things are definitely lost. But also for the audience, I think, for example, if we look at the third iteration, where there's two people that are with the first and last parts of the list, they're sort of not in agreement. And from my experience in sitting in a room where you can look at what people are doing and you can sort of focus your attention, you know, but just by the spatial cues and by the visual cues, then you can, I've had the sensation where I felt like the people who were not in consensus were the ones that became the foreground elements. Basically, you're focusing on them. You want them to get it right, and so they become foreground, even though they are much quieter and much. You know, if you were just sort of counting heads, it would seem clear that they would be overtaken by the larger group, but they somehow become the foreground. I just think that's an interesting thing that's definitely lost in these recordings. I didn't play the recording, did I? So let's do that now.
1, 3, 1, 6, 5, 4. 1, 3, 2, 6, 5, 4. 6, 3, 2, 6, 5, 1. 6, 3, 2, 6, 5, 1.
So this was rendered just using some people recording themselves on freesound.org. So it's far from perfect, and things weren't exactly level, and it's going to vary depending on your listening apparatus. But hopefully, it gives a general idea of how this thing goes. Now, did everyone hear that? Okay. All right. So, thanks. So, I mean, what do I hope to gain from all of this, right? So this is where sort of conjecture starts, but this is where I think the breaking down of the form through this analysis gives a better grasp and starts to allow us to talk about like finer details within the work, and not just say, oh, it's this giant process piece and it's a mess, and they start everyone blabbering away and then they all just decide on a list. There's a lot, there's greater detail in the parts, even if they aren't so neatly sectioned from one another, segmented, I guess, from one another. And the differences between those parts become important when you start to talk about the possible aesthetic effects of these. So this is sort of conjecture and more things that I think, things that I see in this piece. But I think the point will still hold that this is what this kind of analysis allows to see. And so I'm building up to something. This seems kind of silly, but generally I feel like the confusion as a listener, not confusion in the sense of where am I and what's going on, but just trying to piece apart exactly what is going on in the performance, generally I think goes down as the complexity reduces. I think that's a fairly reasonable assumption. And then we go into, so this is like another piece of the puzzle, the directionality. At first it's sort of undirected, it's kind of a mess. But once we start identifying larger and larger groups that do agree, there becomes this directionality of, well, when are they going to converge? We already know what they're going to converge on, and then we're waiting for that resolution at the very end. And so I think sort of using these two supposedly obvious observations, maybe they're not obvious to you, and there's definitely room for individual variability, and we can see that at the start here, but we can start to say things, for example, about the overall tension of, well, I'm not going to fix that now, but about the overall tension, sorry for that typo, that are not necessarily easy to describe otherwise when you're just considering this thing as a giant, as a sort of monolithic thing. And so at the start, where we have, maybe this is like a variable amount of tension depending on your comfort with the confusion, with the sound mass portion of it. So I didn't make a specific choice there. But then starting with as voices converge and the directionality becomes clear, I think the tension clearly rises, especially if you sort of call back to the first recording that I played, when that last person doesn't quite get it. There's this very high tension for the listeners, for the performance, for everybody in the room, where like, come on, get this thing, like everybody hears it. Try to get a grip and let's be done with this thing, which I find really interesting, and it works musically, I think, really well, and it really depends on our ability to parse about these streams and so on. And then obviously it ends in a resolution. Now these sort of ideas well, okay, first of all, before we can say what we might get out of this kind of what I think we can get out of this type of work, I mean, is it obvious? I think in hindsight, the analysis, the things I say here, they seem very simple and straightforward to me, but then organizing them in this way, I feel really allows to then, well, we'll talk about what it allows, but I think if you think back of when I first played that first recording, I don't think a lot of these ideas were that obvious or easy to latch onto. It was just, it's a very chaotic sort of piece, and the performance is very widely. But then taking a step back and doing this kind of analysis, even if in hindsight it seems obvious, can give us some things. And some of those things are specifically related to actor. I think this is a good case to keep in mind when we're trying to generalize things, because so many of our examples are sort of rooted in this late Romantic, early modern European symphonic music and its neighbors, I guess. It's important to have some of these outside views on things to help us understand what are the things that are specifically related to the sort of scope of our research, and what are the things that we can really think we can generalize more broadly. And I think it also actually does show successfully the flexibility of some of the more abstracted theories, right? The talking about sound mass and the general sort of auditory scene analysis and formal structures that arise from that. I think those things hold pretty well, and that's I think that's something that we can sort of keep in mind when we keep adding new theories and new ideas. It gives us an analysis tool set for music that really doesn't usually have strict tools to be analyzed in this way and to talk about form and structure. And apart from giving a new appreciation for this music, I think it gives us a way to compare, let's say, rule sets in these textual scores, compare performances of the same scores, and then we can start talking about the ratios between, the section of the rising tension and when did it fall and how long was it at that high point of tension that one person didn't quite get it and we were all waiting for him relative to the other sections of the piece. And basically, as any analysis tool does, it gives us these posts to start digging deeper with the discussion. And then this is more of a sort of bonus answer to a question that I didn't present because I don't want to give that question too much of a stage, but I did run into it in performances, after performances, discussing it with other people in the audience. There's this question of, is it music, right, when this thing is performed as a text piece like this? And I think the answer, after going through some of the stuff I've talked so far, I think the answer is absolutely yes, because it behaves exactly in the same ways that we talk about, sort of the more typical, I guess, musical pieces that an audience going to these concerts might be familiar with. And so that's more of a sort of a bonus that comes out of this analysis. Before we go on to questions, how much time do I have? Not really, huh? This is like a just over 2 minute performance. So I think it's worthwhile to give it another listen. And while we're listening, think of questions, and then we can make the most out of the time that we'll have remaining. Need to jump to here. And so that was the same piece, the exact same score, but here they were using a set of pitches as their material, and a more, I guess, typical sort of ensemble from orchestral instruments. All right, so for the question, questions. This is just me shoving all the graphs, because there's usually could you go back to the thing? So feel free to to ask any particular questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Yuval. Anybody have any questions? Roger Reynolds.
So firstly, I'm delighted that you're using voices, because I have felt from the beginning that Actor lost something important by not including voices. Another thought, two somewhat random thoughts. One is the way that the normal hysteresis effect doesn't seem to apply here, so that we hear the gradual convergence upon unanimity in a very clear, very staged, very subtle.
Oh, am I the only one who lost Tim all of a sudden?
No, we lost Roger.
It
ended on subtle.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm not sure what the question was going to be, but I think there's I'm trying to describe a very nice, neat sort of formal, tie a nice bow around the whole form. But obviously, there's a lot of fuzziness, and some of those streams that are formed can sort of be undone. And you can also see if we go into the example. Let's just talk about, let's say, these four, let's call them frames, the iterations of the list, right? If you look at the second sort of the phrase, rather, it's not, as neat as like, oh, everyone on the right side is saying this and everyone on the left side is saying this. That sort of becomes more the case in that third phrase. But then I think there's this interesting, we still hear this sort of general accumulation of consensus, even if we can't say, oh, it's these four and now it's these four. When I listen to performances, I can hear, oh, there's a lot of people agreeing on this. And then later I can say, oh, there's a lot of people agreeing on this. And I tie those two things together because there's a group that is sort of agreeing on them, even though it might not even be the same instruments. So by having several performers basically converge on something, there's this abstract auditory stream of like, what do most people agree on that isn't necessarily tied to any particular instrumentalist or instrumentalists or performers. And so there's all these sort of things that aren't really as neat as I'm presenting them, but I think when you zoom out, this all still holds. I don't know what the question was going to be. But.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting for Roger to show up again, Fabien Levy had a question.
Yes, very interesting topic. I had a question because I saw the word orchestration, I see the words emerge, converge, etc. I want to understand in which fields are you doing your research? Is it in the field of the orchestration with all the questions of blending? We saw that texture, how a mass can work together. You have a lot of music from Berlioz to Ligeti, Xenakis, Victor Zourage using that. So is it in that field that you use those words? Or is it more a research on psychology of musicians? How do they play together? Because it's very predictable and we could imagine one musician never following, never converging. Or is it something more direction perception? You use the word random, but we know that random is something perceptive, it's about cognitivity, and we could imagine something using information theory and Abraham Moll, Shannon. So on which part of those three fields do you focus your research?
Right. I guess, well, the first thing to say is this is sort of I mean, I don't know that my research is so well defined at this point, but I think it's safe to say that this is somewhat of an outlier in the actual work that I do. But I'm using orchestration in the very broadest sense, right? So just the sort of, I guess orchestration for me at this point is very much parallel to just the use of these auditory scene analysis and timbral perceptual phenomena in music. So when you deal with those things, more often than not, it falls within orchestration, within the sort of typical ways we talk about orchestration. But then once you have those abstracted theories, then you can apply them to things like this that have nothing to do with an orchestra necessarily. And so I'm coming to it from the perception side. As for the performers, as some kind of actor network is a problematic word here because actor means something different here. But this isn't about the behavioral psychology of the choices that they're making, although the composer himself is very much interested in this. And when I told him that, we're doing research in music psychology, he was very excited. He was still very excited to collaborate with me on this, and hopefully this will keep going and develop deeper. This is really just my initial thoughts and the sort of starting point for this project. But he was very much excited to hear about it. But yes, the work, I think, was generated, I think it's safe to say from my conversations with him, the work was generated from the sort of maybe behavioral psychology of the performers and their decision-making, whereas I'm coming to it from an audience perception point of view.
Thanks, Yuval. We have to wrap it up.
Yeah.